Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I hope everyone and their families are safe and healthy. Today's topic is a little bit and reminds me of some of the pivots our enterprises and actually all of us personally have executed in the last 1 year. When the COVID quarantine started, I personally and my family, we were indoor people, eating indoors, working indoors. And I think over the last year, we've done more outdoor hikes, eating in -10-degree weather than we've probably done any time in our life. And it just wasn't a case of slapping on a heavy winter jacket and moving outside. It really required changing the way we worked, required changing the way we communicated, collaborated at work or in our personal lives, almost required in some way moving and changing from an indoor operating system to an outdoor operating system. And we're going to talk something similar about how enterprises today are moving to an AI operating system. Over the last 15 years, we've helped our clients make their decisions data-led, whether it be in marketing, in risk, in operations, in compliance. So it was a very natural transition for us to start helping our clients make their entire enterprise and their processes data-led, not just their decisions. As we did that, we've gathered several insights, and today we've crystallized that into 6 specific insights and included client learnings that would probably help make them real. Before we get into the insights, I wanted to thank Praveen and the entire Zinnov team. Praveen is the managing partner at Zinnov and is joining us in the panel later today. But the Zinnov team has really helped us see the market, see clients from several different windows, and that's helped crystallize a lot of the insights, the formula for success, and the maturity models that we're going to present today. Let's move to the next slide. So the first insight, it's really a foundational and simple one. Just as you couldn't slap a touch screen onto a 1990s flip phone to create a smartphone or an iPhone, very similarly, you can't just slap data and AI and RPA onto a current state process and create the new data-driven enterprise. Very often, we've seen data COEs being created, AI COEs being created, large amounts of internal and external data being put together in a new big data environment. That does not help create a data-driven enterprise. And so today, we're going to talk a little about if it's not just about adding data and AI to today's current state process, what does it take? But before we get there, let's actually define what is a data-driven enterprise, because today it's really become a buzzword. So let's go to the next slide. And that's insight 2. A data-driven enterprise uses data to deliver a differentiated trifecta impact. So what's the trifecta impact? A trifecta impact is really reducing cost, improving business outcomes, or improving the customer experience. As we've helped several of our clients, what we've seen is the most successful data-driven business cases, though, are not based on reducing cost, improving outcomes, or even improving customer experience. Our clients have had a very core focus to create differentiated speed in their processes. And to us, differentiated speed is the thermometer for a data-driven business case and a data-driven enterprise. If your objective is to improve the speed by 40%, you are going to get improved efficiency outcomes and a customer experience. On the other hand, if you're only focused on reducing cost and the speed of your process remains just about the same, you're probably not becoming data-driven. All you're doing is hacking a portion of your operational cost away. A couple of examples. We're working with a leading life insurer, and what they realized was it took them about 7 days to process an underwriting, a new business underwriting application. And that was because they had these voluminous physician statements to go through to figure out what the correct life insurance premium needed to be. started with a focus of saying we need to turn this around in a day rather than 7 days. And that drove the transformation. That helped bring AI, justify the business case. And their focus was improve the speed of underwriting to basically capture more market share. Very similar to one of our title operations clients, where delivering a valid, clean title took about 30 days. And they started with the objective of being able to do that in less than 7 days. And that drove the business case, and that drove success. However, as we look around today, there are a lot of failures in digital initiatives and data-driven initiatives. And the obvious question is this all hype? Which brings us to insight 3 on the next page. Let's move to the next page. Yeah, thank you. So when we look at our environment, you hear a lot about 70% of digital initiatives under delivering on their impact, but at the same time, you hear about 80% of enterprises ready to accelerate their digital investments. Is this what Einstein called insanity, where you continue to repeat the same action expecting a different result? And the answer is no, because the answer lies in the 30% that are successful, because therein is the formula for scalability, therein is the formula for evolution. When we look at some of the successful use cases across our clients, which are enticing them and helping them make a rational decision to invest more, if you look at the right-hand side of the page, one of our broking clients, and we'll talk a little about that, was able to deliver a $30 million efficiency reduction across their enterprise for every 10,000 FTEs. And they did that by automating data ingestion across their enterprise. There were 11 million documents that were coming in. They approached it with a goal of automating that to increase speed, and they were able to reduce $30 million per every 10,000 FTEs. It's not just the success and cost reduction or efficiency, though. If you look at Prudential's recent acquisition of Assurance IQ, within 3 years, Assurance IQ was able to command a valuation of $2.5 billion by increasing their acquisitions from 0 to $100 million. That sort of revenue growth in 3 years with an AI-driven model is the kind of holy grail that enterprises are after. And that explains why 80% of enterprises are accelerating their investment. But then what is the formula for survival or success? Do you just have to go through 70% of failure to figure out the 30% of success? Or can we codify this? And that's insight 4. Let's move to the next page. Over our years of experience, we've codified a formula for creating the data-driven enterprise. And it's about upstream AI, locating the AI correctly. Added to that is a redesigned data flow, so not the spaghetti data flows that you see in a legacy constrained environment. Added to that is the scale of the cloud that's moving away from the legacy tech integration that makes it really hard to scale up or actually include best of breed partner capabilities into your solution. And finally, this has to be elevated by the human role, the role of the human. When we see the current state of the environment, we've called it the human operating system. The human role is manual. They typically perform simpler activities, and there's a lot of tribal knowledge embedded within human experts. When you move to the target, what we're calling the AI operating system, the human role is elevated. It's elevated to that of an AI coach, to overseeing the AI and actually executing only the most complex and value-added activities. Let's take an example over here, and I'll stay with the trend of our insurance broker that I was talking about. Before we engaged with them, they already knew the value of AI. They had a great business case. They had over $100 million that they were targeting by automating documents and processes across their enterprise. But they had a lot of AI experiments in the lab. And the reason was those AI proved that it could automate a portion of the activity. However, it was really hard to integrate in the process. There was almost organ rejection of the AI. What we did is we moved the AI solutions upstream and close to the consumer and close to the data input. As a result, just as when water flows downhill and creates its own path, when our upstream AIs generated clean data, it allowed us to redesign the process. A lot of manual work that went in to actually produce clean data got disintermediated and eliminated completely. And we were able to therefore redesign the data flow, bring in new interfaces, bring in new embedded analytics. The technology for our client, our broking client, was an issue. There was a lot of legacy technology. Integrating across multiple systems was taking a lot of time, and there was no possibility of scaling up the computing power that was needed for an AI solution. We moved the AI solution to the cloud. We actually integrated that with certain third-party workflow tools that allowed us to build and deploy that new redesigned workflow and make it work. And finally, the human role. We were able to elevate the client's team to that of helping the AI learn, of becoming an AI coach, of helping the AI evolve. And that was the formula for success for moving from a human operating system to an AI operating system. Why do we, one point which I should have addressed earlier, why do we call it the human operating system? And why do we call it the AI operating system? It's not that humans are not relevant in the AI operating system, their role changes. In the current human operating system, the way processes are designed is based on where the human expert is located, where your transaction processing is done, maybe offshore, where your technology is located. By moving to a data-driven AI operating system, you allow data to design the optimal process flow. We call that as the crow flies process path. But now that we know how to codify and this sort of what is the formula for an AI operating system, the question becomes, where do we begin? How do I know where I am on this maturity cycle? What do I do next? Let's move to Insight 5. We've created a 5x5 AI operating system maturity score. The first 5 relates to breaking up any process into 5 components. How you take data in, how you interact with customers, your speed of decisioning, how you integrate with technology, and how you manage quality and compliance across the process. And we then have created the next 5 are the 5 stages of evolution. We rank each one of the 5 process components across whether a process is manual, whether it's become rule-based, whether it now has an AI roadmap, whether data ingestion has a roadmap, whether customer interactions have an AI roadmap, whether the AI is in production and you actually have integrated AI human operational queues. And what we mean by this is not each queue having some AI, some human. There are some 100% AI queues, there are some 80% AI queues, there are some 50% AI queues. And over time, volume moves from one AI queue to another. And then finally, what we call the 5th stage of evolution, which is the AI learning loop in production. And this is iterative. A lot of times, and my colleague Bill will talk to you about this in the panel discussion. A lot of times, clients feel they've deployed an AI solution and it's done. Really, the holy grail is achieved by making sure that the AI learning loop is activated. We'll take a quick example from one of our healthcare clients over here. The pre-authorizations process is pretty time consuming for a client and really creates a lot of customer experience friction. What is pre-authorization? If I go for a particular medical procedure, the provider or the doctor or the hospital has to call up the insurer to make sure that I am pre-authorized for this procedure. Typically, this requires sending a whole host of documents, making phone calls for a decision to be taken whether my insurance authorizes this process or not. As you can imagine, it's very stressful. We worked with this health insurer, broke the process up into 5 components. We figured out there was a lot of manual data, claims, decision statements being sent to justify why the procedure was needed. There were phone calls between the provider, which were manual. It required very talented medical representatives and agents take that call. The decisioning speed was slow because a lot of data required for this decision was actually obtained in real time manually. What we did over here was we built an AI roadmap. For data ingestion, we started using NLP to automate the ingestion of documents. For customer interactions, we built a roadmap to take specific calls and move them onto a conversational AI. To improve decisioning speed, we built new AI and analytics models. So we call the roadmap as the pivotal stage because that opens the door to having new dynamic AI human cues and actually activating the AI learning group. After this, we come to our last insight, which is actually very, very practical. Not every process is similar. And while you might know what to do next across all 100 of your processes, which one should you do first? And for that, we developed what we call the prioritized use case framework methodology. Very often, clients choose the first use case based on only business value. And looking at implementation complexity is extremely critical because if you can choose, it might be a lower business value case, but if its execution complexity is also low, you can get faster benefit, you can build trust in the organization, and you can activate the data flywheel effect that allows you and earns the credibility to go on to more complex use cases. There are 4 big segments of use cases: complete AI automation, where you can have a turnkey AI solution; AI as assistant, where the AI might automate 80 to 90% of the activity and the process, but you still maintain humans for judgment and validation; partial automation, where it's a really high value business case. We know we're never going to get to a completely AI operated process. So what we do is we automate only pieces of it, but we still are able to deliver impact. But almost as important as what you prioritize is what you do deprioritize. And there are going to be a lot of use cases in the enterprise which are unique, which are extremely complex. And really, frankly, AI technology hasn't reached where it can start making a big impact there. Knowing how to recognize these use cases is pretty key. So what we shared on Insight 5 on sort of the 5x5 matrix, and what we shared here about how to prioritize use cases, there's obviously a lot more detail that is available. Please contact us and we'd be very happy to share our learnings and the details to help you on the AI operating system journey. With that, let's move to the next page. I wanted to hand the discussion over to our panel, where they're going to discuss how to overcome some challenges that we face today and really leverage the AI operating system to create a differentiated trifecta impact. Bill, let me hand it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Ankor. Appreciate it. Great session. And yep, so just a quick introduction. Bill Heffelfinger here. I'm the CTO in our digital group as well as VP of Cloud Engineering. I'm going to introduce the segment again, Overcoming Today's Digital Challenges, Leveraging the AIOS. And joining me on the panel is Gaurav Iyer. So Gaurav, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself real quick.
Yeah, sure, Bill. Thank you. So I'm Gaurav Iyer. I'm the head of digital solutions at EXL. And by digital solutions, we mean solutions which are, driven by AI and on the cloud. And I'm really excited to be talking about AIOS. Thank you for the, invite, Bill.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. And we also have Praveen Badada from Zinnov. So Praveen, if you wouldn't mind a quick introduction.
Yes, thank you, Bill. Hi, Gaurav. Great to connect with you here. Hi, everyone. I'm Praveen. I work as a managing partner at Zinnov, and I drive the global business for enterprise software companies and services providers, enabling their go-to-market in different global territories across all modern technologies. Of course, AI, cloud, and data happen to be the foundational technologies that we focus on, along with automation, blockchain, and many others. I'm very excited to be here. Great session by Ankor, and looking forward to dissecting it further in the panel.
Great. Thanks, Praveen. So, guys, let's dive right in. I've got some questions for you, and we can keep this conversational if possible. The first question I've got is this AIOS. It sounds like a very interesting topic. What does it mean to each of you? And Praveen, since you had the mic last, why don't you go first?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, Ankor did a great job actually explaining what AIOS is, and I'll try and do my bit on it. I'll try and add a little bit more context to it. I think in our minds, as we've been tracking the industry, Bill, globally, digital transformation spends actually crossed $1 trillion last year in 2020. And obviously, a lot of that got accelerated because of the COVID situation as well. A lot of companies who are not digital had no choice but to become digital. And that's where the spend up leveling kind of happened in the last 12 months. And if you look at really the segments where companies kind of invested money with their digital initiatives, was really around outcomes which are specifically around customer experience, better employee productivity, cost savings, cyber security, came out as a big one, and in some specific industries, supply chain management, right? So across these 5 or 6 outcomes that you think of from a digital transformation perspective, the foundational technologies of AI, cloud, and data is something that enable companies to, one, understand what they have in place today, and then figure out newer investment themes to kind of unlock value with the hope of deriving the outcomes from their initiatives, right? So I think of this, ultimate objective of getting the outcomes at an enterprise level by leveraging technologies which are, including things like artificial intelligence, cloud for scale, and data for insights. I think the combination of that to deliver the desired business outcomes is how I look at AIOS. I think Ankor did talk about how the role of human kind of evolves in this model and how a lot of manual work of the past gets converted into digital work of the future. I think that's where the evolution is happening. I don't think it's a state that everyone has gotten lashed onto, but I think it's exciting enough in terms of seeing what the potential could be for companies who choose to go down that particular path.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Praveen. Gaurav, do you have anything you want to add or a different view on this topic?
No, so I think that Bill, as Praveen said, Ankor has covered it very well, although he has stolen some of our thunder, so I'm not forgiving for it, but anyway. So I just want to say to actually me, right, it's all about what Ankor talked, which is the speed, right? And I think the speed of actually getting back to your customer or getting to your customer is actually what is going to drive better business outcomes. So to me, AIOS fundamentally allows you to do that, right? And in that, there are 3 components, at least in my mind, which really allow you to actually allow that to happen. One is the entire part of AIOS enabling you to get clean data, right? And I think that has been a holy grail for, many decades, right? We've had huge data modernization, data transformation, and, they have succeeded, many have not. But AI actually gives you a radical way to get that clean data, right? Once that clean data comes, that actually allows the human in the loop to actually do what he or she is best at, right? Which is take a decision, make a judgment, right? Versus looking at traditional, manual data entry, right? So that is the second component. And the third is AI, and the AIOS allows you to interact with your customer when they actually want to talk to you, right? So not to force an interaction, but actually talk to a customer when they are ready with the right kind of data and insights to actually deliver what service you want. So I think that's the core essence. I'll take a small example, right? Underwriting comes to me as a very clear example, right? Very data intensive, very important process, really core to what an insurer does and how it makes money and how it delivers, experience to its customers. And that's been very manual, and it's been fundamentally on a human OS. Shifting that to an AIOS, you get clean data upfront, right? Because irrespective of what kind of data comes in, the AI makes it clean data for an underwriter to take a decision and actually get back to the customer with something within, a couple of hours, right? That helps you close the deal quicker. That helps you have a satisfied customer, and that basically helps you increase your book of business. So, that's one example and one industry which I've seen it really play out, and I think that's a good example.
Awesome. Thanks so much. I appreciate that, both of you. Yeah, it's interesting, Gaurav, you said speed, and I always think of speed of interacting with people, employees, clients, customers is important. I also see speed as a competitive differentiator. So time to market is also speed. And would both of you agree that the AIOS helps you differentiate amongst your peers?
Yes. So I think, Bill, I'll just take another example, right, of no risk, and I'll take it in an industry which we don't think about, right? So it's about talent solutions. So there's a company we are working with. They're offering talent solutions. Now it's a very competitive marketplace, right? But it is also where they really have it's an unsecured credit, right? So they have an issue where they're not underwritten. Many customers, after availing of their services, are not paying them back. Right? And it's a competitive market. They need to get back within 4 hours. If they don't have someone doing the manual underwriting and credit assessment, they just get back and then they potentially don't understand the risk, right? So what we are building for this company is we're saying, look, don't worry about, trying to build, buy a product, change your legacy system, etc. We'll build you a cloud native app. All you need to do is upload the document that your customer sends you. The AI will basically, whether it's email, any kind of document, even if it's an audio file, AI, figures out, creates clean data that quickly our underwriting models, right, which we have built for them, can quickly take a judgment call, and then that gets shown on a screen to your, underwriter, and within a couple of minutes they can take a yes, no, and it goes back. Now the key point is because they're able to now shorten the cycle of getting back, they're actually able to win 30-40% more business. Right. So to your point, Bill, it's the speed at which you can get back to your customer that is driving the outcome.
Very good. Thank you. Praveen, you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think there's hardly a doubt in terms of the speed gains that technologies like AI and cloud and data kind of provide to customers. I think that goes without saying. There are ample examples like Gaurav mentioned and Ankor did talk about in the keynote as well, where companies have definitely benefited out of it. But in our observation, Bill, and I think this is a key one, right? And partially Ankur touched upon this. I think in general at this point, right, roughly about 10% companies have been able to truly benefit from a concept called AIOS or a similar concept where you look at confluence of cloud and AI and data all put together. I think it's important to understand why is that happening, and which is why a lot of enterprises are getting constrained in terms of speedy delivery and execution and outcomes that they want to get from these kind of initiatives. I think fundamentally, I feel there are 3 categories of challenges. One, of course, and I would rate that as number 1, is really the cultural and mindset shift. It's easier said than done when you have a legacy of doing things in a certain way for several decades and centuries together. It's very hard for employees at the grassroots level to kind of make that shift happen, right? So it requires a little bit of a hand-holding, a little bit of a structure in place to be able to do that effectively. The second big element is, like Gaurav said, a lot of these companies that we talk to today are not data doesn't come natively to them, right? There's a lot of legacy that they have. There are a lot of systems which are not built with a data first, digital first kind of principle, and which is why extracting value from them kind of remains a little bit of a bottleneck. And third, I would say is the skill set itself, right? We were talking to companies in the oil and gas industry. We were talking to companies in pharma. Some of them are not based in either Silicon Valley or East Coast, New York, Boston kind of areas. And the moment you are not in these locations, it becomes extremely difficult for you to find the right set of talent who is motivated enough to work with you on the programs that you want to run, right? So a combination of that, just the sheer difficulty of finding the right people to work on these transformative programs, I think is also a bottleneck, which is why I think there's a lot of opportunities for companies like yours and Gaurav's, Bill, in terms of enabling some of those enterprises to find the right skills and right tools and right ecosystems. But at this moment, I would say 90% companies are actually struggling with all of this, and which is why though speed is a good outcome, not everyone is able to get that outcome at the moment.
Yeah, good perspective. And it lines up with the next question I had. And there's also a question from the audience about this. So, this is all very interesting, and we've got a small percentage of companies really, truly leveraging an AI model of sorts or an AIOS. How do you get started? If you're one of these companies that's in the 90% of not leveraging this, or maybe you have something in R&D but not figuring out how to get it into production, I'll throw a jump ball up. You guys can decide who goes first, but how do we get there? How do we get started on this journey?
Yeah, maybe I can start and Gaurav, you can add. I think I would tie the playbook back to the challenges that I kind of talked about, Bill, in my view, it's a three-pronged approach that organizations need to take. Organizational agility, in my mind, is the biggest one. Rallying the organization behind the goal and the sheer ability to drive cultural change is a very important and a critical pillar. And the fact that companies are today struggling to find the right funding, they don't have an OKR associated with the investment that they're making, they don't have measurable goals and milestones. I think changing that from a top-down perspective, I think is extremely important. Second, I would say is goes back to Ankur's point earlier in the keynote, building a data and AI foundation, right? Making AI upstream, right? It's essential to unlock value from not just existing data assets, but anything that you're creating new. The design principle of that has to be AI first, data first. And even in the legacy systems, the idea for enterprises should be to be able to infuse AI, to Gaurav's point, right? To make the data clean and infuse AI into it and let the AI evolve on itself based on the use cases that the enterprises are trying to solve for. I think that's the second pillar in my mind. And third, I think investments in all kinds of intelligent assets. And when I say intelligent assets, it includes both human assets, which is a skills component that we talked about, as well as the technology assets that companies need to invest into, right? Having the right tools, having the right platforms, having the right technology to support you and modernize the legacy infrastructure that you have, I think is, in my mind, the third very critical component. Once you invest into these three categories of org agility, building the data and AI foundation, as well as investing into intelligent assets, both people and technology, I think that sets you on the path to getting closer to the AIOS kind of philosophy and concept, and over a period of time, right? To be able to even derive outcomes and value from some of these initiatives.
Awesome, thanks. By the way, I want you my basketball team since you got the jump ball, but I think you were just being polite. So, Gaurav, do you have anything you wanted to add to that, or?
Yeah, no, I think I'll just add a couple of points, Bill. So I think, I agree with Praveen. Obviously, it makes a lot of sense. I would just double click on the point, on the first point he made, which is I think it's important that at a strategic senior executive level, there is a mandate to make this change. Where we have seen this change happen and with clients who are able to make it happen, they actually have a C-suite champion, right? And for example, at the large broker which Ankor mentioned, we actually have the COO who's actually chairing this capability. Right, and there is, under his team is where we are building it out. So I think that's point one, which is we need to have an executive champion and it has to be front and center strategy. The second is, I think there is an element of the design and the entire, as Ankor mentioned, the prioritization, right? So I think the company should spend enough time upfront. And that's where, we have a maturity model, companies have their own, but we should spend time to figure out what is the 3-year roadmap. And what use cases do we start and how do we go? And what are the goals and outcomes and OKRs, as Praveen said, which we should measure, right? So the second is roadmap and prioritization. The third element is, I think companies need to start building out engineering capabilities on the cloud as well as AI. So I think AI and analytics, people have invested, a lot of capability has been built up. But I think a lot of the engineering capabilities are some things that, companies need to bring into mainstream. So I think that's the third element. And the fourth is, fundamentally it is the change management with operations and what the humans need to do, right? So the entire piece about redesigning the human, operating procedure and to ensure that that gets communicated and done in a very, very detailed manner is the fourth element of the, end-to-end how companies can actually move to an AIOS.
Awesome. Great answers, guys. And so if I underscore one thing, it's change management. And it could be cultural change, process change, all the above. But I've been doing this long enough. I know change management, if you don't handle it well and get an executive sponsorship, it's really hard to get anything else done. So thanks for the answers. There was also another question or comment actually in the audience about, making sure that we talk about how businesses can adopt these things and become self-sufficient, instead of relying on consultants for the duration of their business to keep them running. So I think as we answer these questions, kind of keep that in mind as well. How do people actually go from keeping it in the lab, it being AI projects, and driving it into production? So With that as a backdrop, Ankor talked about the 5 levels of maturity, the 5x5 view of the world in terms of maturity. Gaurav, I'm going to ask you, since you had the mic last, what does that translate into your mind in terms of how do you move from level 1 through level 5 and getting these practices into production beyond what we've already discussed?
Yeah, so I think that, Bill, on the first part, right, I think at least the realization we have had, and a lot of the clients that we have talked to are also having, is it's important to build out an ecosystem. I think there are very few businesses who are going to be able to do all of this and the shift to an AIOS completely on their own, especially given it's competitive. You have to do it at speed, all of that, right? So I think it's about how you have an ecosystem which you trust, and how that ecosystem, in terms of when they build out solutions for you, how that is something that you can take on and actually run going forward as a business, right? So it's about collaboration with trusted partners, right? And I think that is very important, and I think that's actually a key to success in terms of how you want to shift to AI or OS. Now, to your specific question, Bill, in terms of how you move across the various maturity levels, right? I think, as I said, point is, first we need to prioritize and we need to get into a roadmap, right? And we need to find a use case that can actually make the art of the possible into reality, deliver outcomes, which then becomes what the organization rallies around, right? So I think that first use case that you actually, figure out and build out becomes the first big thing. Once you have got that first use case under your belt, I think the second big element of moving into the maturity is how do you make it from use case into capability, right? And so that is where you actually take a decision about, do you want to really buy, you want to build, you want to partner, because you want to scale it up, right, in a manner, right? So that is where, the entire scaling up of the AI comes in. The third part is, once you have 10, 12 use cases which you have deployed, you have seen success. I think the next big thing is, how do you really put all of this into something which are much more fundamental, which is new product development, strategy differentiation. So how do you really move from scaling up a capability to that capability allowing you to win more in the market? So that's the third level of where you really drive business outcomes. And the fourth is to be, once you perfect that, then are you really known in the market, right? Do your customers see you as driving the best customer experience in your industry? And that's the level 4 of the maturity. And that actually is a journey, right? So I don't think you can get to that unless you do the first 3 in a very considered manner.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. I appreciate that. Hey, Praveen, I'm going to switch gears on you a little bit. Same general topic, but there's a question from the audience. This is great. We're in production. How do you operationalize this? What are the requirements from an operations perspective once you're in a production context? Do you mind addressing that?
Yeah, sure. I think just I'll tie back this question to what Gaurav also said. I think the usual saying in the technology world, Bill, and you've been long enough in this market, so you know this very well. I think in general, people tend to believe that they should not let good be the enemy of perfection, right? And which is the operating model for a number of years. I think in the AIOS construct, there's a need to change that a little bit, right? I think we should be fine with good, right? And we should not worry about being perfect with respect to some of these initiatives, and which I think is one of the fundamental problems that we see with a lot of companies who kind of invariably fail with their initiatives, and they're not able to operationalize some of this at scale while they've had some initial successes, purely because the expectations on ROI sometimes are totally unrealistic. And because they are not able to meet those unrealistic expectations, they're actually also not satisfied with whatever outcomes they actually derived from all of these investments, which are reasonably okay, which are reasonably good. In fact, a lot of companies are trying to figure that out. We were in conversation with JP Morgan Chase yesterday, and one of the interesting things that these guys have done is they have broken down the center of excellence model. They are experimenting with AIOS in a number of ways. What they've done is they have broken down the center of excellence concept into 2 parts. There's a center of excellence for backend processes, and there's a center of excellence. There are actually multiple centers of excellence for front-end customer-centric use cases, right? And in a usual scenario, these 2 types of COEs can operate independently because there are use cases which are independent and not really connected. And in case there are mission critical use cases which are connected, these two groups kind of come together and kind of address the use case. So it kind of provides them the agility, the speed, required to be able to make progress all round. And then if there are critical use cases that needs to be addressed, the two teams can really come together. The other thing we've usually seen work very well, Bill, is when you operate and when you think of this in two different speeds, right? So while you let your organization do things that the way they've been doing and kind of make incremental progress, you kind of set up a different org, right? Almost like a startup within a large enterprise whose job is to actually experiment with some of these use cases, based on the priority framework that Ankur talked about, right? Select 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of those use cases and prove initial success, right? We've seen that with companies like ANZ, who in case of automation, for example, leveraged India Center, where they kept a lot of these initiatives under the radar. They kept experimenting on it, and when they started seeing outcomes, they made the visibility happen for that, and then eventually it became an organizational priority, right? So a lot of that depends on how do you orchestrate the ecosystem. In many cases, I think companies try and keep a lot of this in-house, and the invariable disadvantage there is that they don't have experience of doing it in the past, and which is why the speed kind of gets constrained, because you're learning by doing and you're not leveraging best practices that are available already in the market. So which is why sometimes looking outward, right, looking for partners who have dealt with similar situations in the past and have had experience, doing this multiple times over, I think is another important scenario to consider in these cases. And I think lastly, I would say just working with the startup community, right? Because sometimes the kind of problem solving scenarios, the kind of approaches that startups are able to take are a lot more differentiated compared to how enterprise would usually do it. And just being in the know, right? Just being in that ecosystem, just being connected with the agile ecosystem of startups kind of enables and empowers organizations to think differently and think creatively, and eventually make progress in some of these outcomes. So I think it's a long journey. It's not going to be a journey. You cannot move from level 1 to level 5 in 5 months or 10 months. You have to be at it. It might take 3-5 years in some cases as well. But as long as you're clear on the outcomes that you will derive and you want to derive, because there's no other choice, because competition is coming from all sides, then you have to invest adequately and you have to fix some of these scenarios as you go along.
Cool. Thanks, Praveen. I appreciate it. So, gents, if you could, in very concise terms, in less than a half a minute, what are the key takeaways and that you'd want the audience to take from this panel discussion? We've covered a lot of great ground, but I'd love to get your thoughts on like 2 or 3 highlights. So, Gaurav, if you wouldn't mind going first.
Yeah. Thanks, Bill. So I think number one, I would say that you need to assess where you are on that journey. You need to do a quick maturity assessment, and then craft out a roadmap over the next 12 months in terms of how you are going to start in the use case journey. I think the second is, I would say, you need to look at specific talent around AI and cloud engineering. Those are, key fundamental levers and enablers. And the third thing I would say is that, focus on how you want to do the change management, how you want to, change the role of the human from processing to actually making judgment. And I think that's a big shift, and a lot of time and effort needs to happen. So I think these are the 3 big, takeaways. If I were to, summarize, Bill, these are the 3 things I would say.
Awesome, great. And Praveen, while you're answering, if the production team can bring Ankor back on stage for our audience Q&A session, that would be great. But your top takeaways, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I would say, I think one has to understand that this is a transformational opportunity, and even if no one in their industry is doing it, they should take the risk and they should move fast, because the outcomes are going to come, and it's going to be foundational way of running the business going forward. So I think embrace it and march forward with it. Obviously, you have to be smart about it. You don't have to take unnecessary risk, but so long as there's clarity that this is going to stay and companies are able to commit to it, I think the outcomes are going to be there. I would say progress cannot happen in some of these cases without change, and companies should be willing to change. Like you said, change management is going to be a big need of the hour, and they need to be able to manage that effectively. So without change, I think change in infrastructure, change in skills, change in culture, I think all of that is mandatory to be able to drive outcomes from something like this. And lastly, I would say, think of it into 3 or 4 parts, right? The entire journey to AIOS. One, I think is extremely important to identify and discover the right processes. Second, I think data transformation, right? There are a lot of unstructured data streams, a lot of data that you are not able to extract value. The ability to see those data parcels and using the right tools and technologies to transform the data to your advantage, I think is going to be important. And third, infuse automation as much as possible, right? And automation of all kinds, including RPA, workflow automations, APIs, low code, no code, intelligent voice agents, all kinds of automations, I think needs to be embedded. I would almost say that while you're thinking of cloud native and AI native, you should also think of processes to be automation native, right? And if you look at the confluence of these three, right, AI native, cloud native, and automation native, I think the outcomes can be derived sooner than later. So I would say those are the 3 or 4 guiding principles or key takeaways to be able to derive value from this.
Excellent. Thank you, Praveen. So Ankor, you want to come back on stage? And we do have a question from the audience. I want to put it out to whoever wants to answer. Let's just have one person provide an answer unless you feel super strong that you want to weigh in. So the question is, who within the organization should own and drive the transformation with AIOS? And there's a follow-on question. What is the successful model in this respect that companies can adopt? So, Ankor, you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. But I'm going to cheat a little bit. First, I'm going to respond to a question that was asked earlier, but I was backstage and therefore muted.
Well, please.
There was this question about making clients self-dependent, right? And the easy answer, of course, is yes, you have to train everyone and you've got to elevate the human role. That's the easy answer. However, I think there's a truth that's being lost there. If you could only focus on one thing, and if you focus on being self-dependent versus creating differentiated speed in the market, you're probably going to underperform. In the last 1 year, organizations that have succeeded have actually been the ones who figured out the way to create a best of breed process by using third-party applications. And if you are so focused on actually doing everything on your own, you sometimes lose the benefit of the ecosystem. So I just want to make that point. Obviously, no one's saying you shouldn't be self-dependent, but I think it's a fine balance and you can't lose track of that. But to your, I'll answer one part of the question you actually asked so that I don't completely cheat, and then I'll hand it back to the panel. Who in the organization? Again, because this actually touches so many parts, what we found is it's never one. You have a sponsor. It could be either on the business side or it could be the CIO team. But the key over here is having a sort of what I call the AI Marines who are able to talk the tech language, who are able to talk the business language, and therefore bridge that divide. So the ownership can reside anywhere. You've got to be able to speak 2 languages for successful execution.
Thanks. That's a great answer. I'm going to move on to the next question, actually. I think that covers it really well. And I'm going to queue up the question, but I'm going to start a conversation about it. What about the people part of this? Won't implementing this AIOS displace people? It's interesting. I've been doing technology for 30 plus years, and every time there's a technological evolution, I get the same question. That, oh, wow, you're automating AP imaging and AP processing. Isn't that going to take away the accounts payable processors' jobs? Well, it doesn't take it away, it changes it. So the answer I gave in my past life, I can continue to give today, is that it allows people to be serving in a higher value add capacity, leveraging technology, acquiring different skills to be successful going forward, and it actually elevates. Ankor said this in his keynote. It elevates the human component of everything that we do. So it's actually a nice complement to the human, not a displacement of humans. Do you guys have anything you want to add to that statement?
Yeah, I think one of the ways to think. I agree with your answer, Bill. I think in general, our belief is that technologies like artificial intelligence and automation in general will enable human beings to perform better tasks and more interesting work compared to mundane work. Having said this, I think this will be a little bit of a transition phase, right? So it might take a few years when the new sets of opportunities start becoming very clear and older sets of opportunities actually start feeling very boring and mundane to a lot of people, right? Because to be honest, a lot of people do derive their earnings today by doing those mundane jobs, right? And they may today not be as ready to take up the next interesting job or next creative job without retooling or reskilling, right? And unless someone fixes that component of retooling and reskilling, right? And unless individuals are themselves invested in making that happen, it might actually be a disastrous situation, right? It might be a situation where people may not want to do the mundane and the regular, but are not equipped enough to do what is desired of them, right? So I think it's going to be a little bit of that transition, and it's the onus is on the individuals and corporations like yours and ours to kind of facilitate that retooling and reskilling for the masses. It's an ecosystem play. No individual company can do it alone. Obviously, there's a macroeconomic view to it as well. So long as the cost of buying is going to be more than cost of buying is going to be expensive, people will look for technologies like automation, AI, and eventually may even displace people. So if you look at from a macroeconomic standpoint, the onus is also on government to make borrowing money a lot more easier so that they can invest in modernization versus optimization a lot more, and which is actually the thesis of digital transformation, right? You should be able to invest more than what you look from a savings and cost optimization standpoint, right? So there's this human side of it and there's this macroeconomic side of it. I think the balance between the two and the individual responsibility to be able to retool and reskill, I think is going to be extremely important in my view.
Yeah, thanks, Praveen. Gaurav, if you can weave in to your commentary a little bit about the challenges that we'll face. I think we were covering it already, but I think the human aspect and change management we've already talked about. So what other challenges, if you can weave that into your answer or what you were going to say?
Yeah, no, I think that Bill, I just want to add one thing, that I think a lot of the AIOS actually also enables humans to do better. So for example, AI coach that Ankor spoke about, it actually helps you perform your job better. So I think there is a positive side which sometimes get overlooked, as you say, because the first instinct is fear. So I think that's, and that's there. I think in terms of the challenges, right? So I think we definitely talked about culture and change management as one. I think the second big thing is obviously the entire use case prioritization and roadmap, right? So if you go wrong there, if you look at either a too technology centric or a too AI centric or a too, business centric, I think you would probably go wrong. It's a mix that you have to do. So I think the crafting of that roadmap and that maturity model assessment is important. The third important aspect is data privacy and data security. So I think, Bill, you probably want to comment on that, but that's a big, especially as you move to the cloud and as you are having data, there is a general feeling that, data is moving all over. It cannot be right? But there are ways to solve for that. And I know you are very passionate about it. So I think that's number 3. And I think the fourth thing is, I think there is integration with large technology or legacy. So I think that's the other challenge. And I think there are ways to build out cloud native apps. So as Ankor said, we are actually working with a title operation and title insurance company to say, look, forget about legacy, we'll build you something which is cloud native and we'll move your data-led processing over there. So I think those are the 4 challenges, Bill, if I were to summarize.
Bill, can I add one very quick thought?
Yeah,
to
please.
me, it goes back to insight 1. Do you think you have a feature problem, or do you realize you have an operating system problem? Because if you approach this as a feature problem, you'll think your people need to be reskilled and then you'll do that. And you'll think a process need to be redesigned and you'll do that. On the other hand, if you realize this is an operating system problem, you're not trying to slap the touch screen on a flip phone. To me, that's the biggest challenge. Feature versus operating system problem.
Got it. Thanks. That wraps up our questions. Any parting, tidbits that you want to leave with, Ankor, especially since Gaurav and Praveen had a chance to opine in the last session?
No, to me, I don't have anything additional to add. I think I said my piece during the keynote. Speed, to me, if there was one thing which we would shine the spotlight on, that's what's going to drive differentiation. That's what's going to drive impact.